creatures that lived in the furthest depths of the fundament. On the fundament, Savathun, one of the 3 exiled daughters of the Osmium king, heard instructions from a dead worm. Following those instructions, the sisters travelled into the depths of their world, where they met the Leviathan, who warned them against travelling deeper. Welcome, Guardians. My name is Trams87, and in this video I want to talk about the darkness. But to understand what the darkness is, we need to go back just a little bit, because in order to understand who the darkness is, we need to first understand who are the worm gods. If you're new to Destiny and you've never played the game before, or maybe you've been playing Destiny and you're wondering, who are the worm gods? What is all of this stuff? What's the darkness? And who's the traveller? Well, in these series I'd like to cover some of those things and maybe share my thoughts on some of the reasons behind the darkness and what it intends to do with us. So without further ado, here is Worm Gods, and it reads: They ignored his warnings to meet 5 creatures that called themselves the Worm Gods: Yul, Ea, Zol, and Akar. Yul described himself as being dragon-like, saying, "I am Yul, the honest worm. Behold my passage. Behold my vast displacement. My ponderous strength, my great and coiling length, my folded jaws and curled wings. Behold the hiving cities symbiotic with my flesh. I am Fisund, Urash. I am at the beginning and end of lives. Behold, and Zol, and and Akar, the virtuous worms. Look upon us and know that we are good." The 5 creatures said that they had been trapped in the depths of the planet for millions of years, and that in that time they had summoned many species to Fundament. The worm gods were aligned with a force that they called the Deep, and opposed to the nature of the sky, including the Leviathan and the Traveller, who they said were agents of the sky. According to the Leviathan, the Deep claim was that the existence of the struggle is to exist. It seems that while the force of the sky promoted cooperation, the forces of the Deep promoted competition. Yul proposed a bargain to the 3 sisters. If the sisters would take the worm god's larvae into their bodies, then the sisters would gain incredible power, enough to retake their kingdoms. In return, the sisters would have to promise never to abandon satisfying their curiosity, testing their strength, or using their cunning. The sisters accepted the bargain, leading to the birth of Oryx, Savathun, and Arath. Led by Oryx, the sisters spread larvae to the rest of their species, creating the hive. Races aligned with the sky tried to prevent the hive from leaving the fundament, but they were annihilated. When the hive met resistance against the united forces of the Ecumene, Oryx realized that the way of the Deep was to take what was needed, but the worm gods had given their larvae freely. In order to gain mastery over the Deep, Oryx would need to take the power for himself. I find it really interesting in this particular piece, because there are some things that I would like to pull out of here that have otherwise never really been spoken about unless you go into the Ishtar Collective to read about the worm gods. And what I specifically would like to highlight is this portion here, number 1. "Behold the hiving cities, symbiotic with my flesh." So it's clear that Yule, as I would assume he's proclaimed himself worm god, the best worm god, he also describes himself as dragon-like. So I wonder if we can draw any comparisons or maybe connections between the worm gods and the Ahamkara. I could be wrong. Perhaps other people will know more about that than myself, but it does beg to reason, why would a worm god describe himself as a dragon, or as he put it, dragon-like? And then all the attributes that he describes himself as are very worthy of fairy tale-like dragons. They tend to live up to these sort of stereotypical big words like vast or ponderous or strength or coiling length. It's usually an emphasis on size when it comes to dragon, because it's assumed that the bigger the dragon, the more power it has, or the more wise the dragon is, which isn't always the case, and fairy tale history will have different defenses against why being a big dragon isn't important. But I found it really interesting. I also found it interesting that Yule also mentions about "Behold the hiving cities, symbiotic with flesh." So one would assume that the hive became the hive based on some of Yule's properties, and that's how they ended up being who they are now, because obviously the hive weren't originally called the hive, they became the hive due to eating the larvae of the worm gods, all 5 of them. And then what's interesting is how Oryx, before he was Oryx, it literally sounds the same, was very interested in going further than the worm gods. In fact, he almost wanted to attempt to master the darkness. So one would wonder if he was being manipulated by the darkness, or what level of sentient did Oryx have that encouraged him to take the worm god's hunger that little step further, and then also give him enough strength to be able to actually kill a worm god. Because when you read further on, it's clear that the 3 sisters essentially became ascendant hive gods. That's the best way to put it. So if you're a god, then obviously you have the strength to slay another god. So it's really interesting. So the darkness is this entity that seems to be able to not only manipulate species that already exist, but seems to predate a lot of what we know in the current Destiny universe, and particularly the connection between the worm gods and the deep. So the darkness's original name, before we knew it as the darkness, or as we Guardians describe it as the darkness, is the deep. And it's that deep that I think then what's even more interesting is the fact that there's also the light. So the light isn't just the traveler, the light is beyond the traveler, and then the traveler is defined as almost like an emissary or a guardian of the light, or almost like a soldier to the light. At least that's how the worm gods describe the nature of the sky, and the Leviathan is part of that group, and the traveler is the agent of the sky. So then it got me thinking, this potentially could be where Bungie is going, and this I believe to be way bigger than the darkness, or as the worm gods describe it, the deep, is this. The pyramids are perhaps just an agent of the real darkness, the same way the traveler is an agent of the sky, which means to say that in the next 6 weeks we're going to face off against, I guess, the pyramids, who operate, I would assume that the pyramids are ships filled with taken races. A lot of races that we already don't know about inhabit that ship. And because the darkness is about competition and competing and taking over and consuming, then that's who the Taken are. So the Taken will be the first new race. I think the next 2 races will be perhaps the actual races of the deep, and then the actual race of the sky. So we have these 2 contrasting races. Now, I mentioned in my previous video, Destiny 3, What's Next, that perhaps the Traveler isn't all good, But based on the definition of this law, the worm gods conclude that the traveller is an agent of the sky, and so we would assume that the light means good, because the light is about coexistence, peace treaties, everything that involves life not being lost. And the deep, which is the darkness, or the deep is perhaps more dangerous than the darkness itself, is all consuming, all destruction, all competitive, always wants to fight against the sky. It's a really interesting narrative. And so these are my thoughts on the darkness, and I hope that you've enjoyed it. If you have any thoughts or questions around this, or you want me to go a little bit deeper, then definitely leave your comment in the comment section. But for now, it's over and out from me. Thanks for watching. God bless. Peace.